Good morning. It is the kind of story that usually gets buried beneath the shouting matches about trade wars and diplomatic insults, a story about a mineral most Americans will never see, never touch, and likely never think about. But right now, that mineral is at the center of a crisis that threatens to hollow out the American heartland. We are talking about potash. If you think this is just a boring agricultural commodity, you are missing the single most dangerous economic miscalculation of the current administration. President Trump promised that his tariff war would bring Canada to its knees, promising that America first meant American independence. But tonight, we have to look at the hard evidence. We have to look at the numbers that the White House does not want to talk about, because the reality is that this trade war is not punishing Canada. It is handing them a winning lottery ticket, and the people paying the price are not in Ottawa or Toronto. They are in Iowa. They are in Illinois. They are the American farmers who are watching their livelihoods evaporate because of a policy that ignores the basic laws of supply and demand. Let's cut through the spin and look at what is actually happening. In mid-2025, the administration rolled out a sweeping new tariff package targeting Canadian imports. The rhetoric was familiar. We were told this was about protecting American jobs. We were told it was about creating a fairer domestic market. From steel to aluminum, the targets were broad, but hidden in that list was potash, a potassium chloride fertilizer that is the absolute lifeblood of modern agriculture. The argument from the administration was that we needed to protect domestic mining, that we could not be reliant on foreign adversaries or even friendly neighbors for our essential resources. On paper, that sounds like a strong patriotic argument. It plays well at a rally, it sounds good in a soundbite, but when you look at the geology, the argument falls apart completely. Here are the facts that no amount of political maneuvering can change. In 2023, the United States produced about 400,000 tons of potash. That sounds like a lot until you realize that American farmers consumed 5.3 million tons of it in the same year. Do the math. We produce less than 10% of what we need to survive. We are not just a little bit short. We are almost entirely dependent on imports. And where does that missing 90% come from? It comes from Canada. Canada is the Saudi Arabia of potash. They control the market. Saskatchewan alone holds over half of the planet's known reserves. In 2023, more than 85% of the potash used on American soil came from across the northern border. So when the president slaps a tariff on Canadian potash, he is not protecting an American industry that is waiting to spring back to life. You cannot tariff a mine into existence where the minerals do not exist. What he is doing is placing a massive tax directly on the American farmer. We have seen this playbook before, but the stakes this time are different. This isn't just about slightly higher prices at the grocery store next year. This is about the fundamental viability of the American family farm. Economists warned the White House. They laid it out in black and white. They said that if you disrupt the Canadian supply chain, fertilizer prices would not just tick up, they would skyrocket by 20 to 30%. For a hobby gardener, maybe that is an annoyance. For a farmer working thousands of acres in the Midwest, operating on razor-thin margins, that is a catastrophe. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional costs appearing overnight. One agricultural expert put it bluntly, saying that without Canadian potash, American agriculture would collapse. That is not hyperbole. That is a description of biological reality. Without this specific nutrient, corn stalks collapse, soybeans wither, wheat fields turn barren. So we have to ask the tough question: why launch a trade war you are mathematically guaranteed to lose? The administration claims this is about leverage. They claim that if we squeeze Canada hard enough, they will blink. They believe that Ottawa needs our market more than we need their minerals. But that calculation ignores the shifting reality of the global economy. We are treating Canada like a vassal state that has no other options, but the world has changed. While Washington plays checkers with tariffs, Canada is playing chess with strategic resources. They know exactly what they have. They know that the world's population is growing, and they know that every nation on earth needs to secure its food supply. By trying to weaponize our consumption, we have inadvertently weaponized their production. We have given them the leverage. The fallout is already starting to show up in the data, and it is ugly. In 2024, U.S. farm bankruptcies surged by 55%. Let that number sink in. That was before these new tariffs fully bit down. Analysts are now predicting that if these potash tariffs stay in place, that bankruptcy number could double within 2 years. We are looking at a potential extinction event for the independent American producer, and yet the official line from the White House remains unchanged. They tell us to be patient. They tell us that the pain is necessary for long-term gain, but you have to ask, what is the gain? If the goal is American energy and resource independence, we are failing because we physically do not have the rocks in the ground. If the goal is to hurt the Canadian economy, we are failing there too because, as we are about to see, Canada is finding plenty of other buyers who are more than happy to take the potash that American farmers can no longer afford. This is the definition of a backfire. We have launched a policy designed to project strength, and instead it has exposed a critical weakness. We have taken a strategic partnership, one of the most stable trade relationships in history, and turned it into a vulnerability. And while the politicians in Washington debate the theoretical merits of protectionism, the farmers in the Corn Belt are looking at their spreadsheets and realizing the math simply does not work anymore. Fertilizer already accounts for nearly 40% of a farm's operating expenses. When you artificially inflate that cost in a misguided attempt to look tough, you aren't fighting for America. You are dismantling the foundation of American agriculture brick by brick. We need to dig deeper into who is actually winning this fight, because while American silos are facing a crisis, the mines in Saskatchewan are humming along. The global demand for food is not going down. The world needs potash. And if the United States decides it wants to make it harder to buy, the Canadians are not going to shut down their mines. They are simply going to call Brazil. They are going to call China. They are going to look at the map and realize that the United States is not the only customer in town. In the next segment, we are going to look at the specific players in this drama. We are going to look at the farmers who are being asked to sacrifice their heritage for a trade war that makes no sense, and we are going to look at how Canada is quietly rewriting the rules of the global resource game while Washington is busy patting itself on the back. This is not just a trade dispute. It is a shifting of the tectonic plates of global power, and right now, America is standing on the fault line. Let's put a face on these numbers, because when you talk about billions of dollars in trade deficits or macroeconomic shifts, it is easy for the reality to get lost in the abstraction. The reality is James Whitaker in Iowa. James is not a lobbyist. He is not a cable news pundit. He is a farmer trying to keep a family business running in an economy that seems determined to shut him down. In 2024, before this latest round of tariff escalation, Whitaker spent roughly $420,000 on fertilizer alone. That is just to get the crop in the ground. Nearly half of that massive bill was for potash. Now look at what the administration's policy does to that ledger. When you apply the tariffs that the White House is threatening, his supplier didn't mince words. They warned him that his costs could jump by $120,000. That is not a projected loss of profit. That is an explosion of operating costs. For a family farm, an extra $120,000 is not a line item you can just absorb by cutting corners. That is the difference between buying new seed for next year or going to the bank to ask for a lifeline. That is the line between survival and bankruptcy. And this is where the administration's strategy reveals its most fatal flaw. They act as if these farmers are operating in a vacuum, as if they can simply pass these costs along to the consumer or absorb them until the trade war is won. But James Whitaker and thousands like him across the Midwest are getting crushed from both sides. This is the part of the story the press briefings leave out. It is not just that their expenses are skyrocketing because of the potash tariffs. It is that their revenue is plummeting because of the retaliation. When we slap tariffs on foreign goods, other countries do not just say thank you. They hit back, and they hit back where it hurts, American agriculture. So you have farmers facing record high input costs to grow crops that are selling at depressed prices because our export markets are drying up. Grain bins across the Midwest are bursting at the seams because the buyers are gone, yet the cost to grow that grain is higher than it has ever been. This is not a strategy. It is a pincer movement against our own rural economy. We have to interrogate the logic here. The White House tells us this is about leverage, about forcing Canada to the table. But leverage requires you to have the upper hand, and when it comes to potash, the United States does not hold the cards. Canada does. We need to be very clear about the geopolitical reality of Saskatchewan. This province is not just a polite neighbor to the north, it is the global superpower of this specific mineral. Saskatchewan produces more than 40% of the world's potash. They control the pricing hub. They control the supply lines. When Ottawa hints, as they have done, that potash could become a strategic countermeasure, we should not take that as an idle threat. We should take it as a statement of fact. The logic from Canada is simple and brutal. If the United States attempts to choke off trade in steel or aluminum, Canada can restrict the flow of the very minerals that allow American crops to grow. They have the ability to turn the tap off. We do not have the ability to live without the water. This leads us to the counter-argument we hear from the administration's defenders. They tell us, well, if Canada won't sell to us, we will buy it from someone else. The market will adjust. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the global map. You cannot just shop around for potash like you are buying a used car. The options are severely limited, and frankly, they are dangerous. If we cannot buy from Canada, who is left? The other major producers are Russia and Belarus. Let's play that scenario out. Are we seriously suggesting that the solution to a trade dispute with our closest ally, Canada, is to make the American food supply dependent on Vladimir Putin? Russia and Belarus are sanctioned, politically unstable, and actively hostile to American interests. Their supply chains are unreliable at best and completely frozen at worst. The only other player of note is China, and China consumes almost everything it mines to feed its own massive population. They are net importers, not saviors for the American Midwest. So the Buy American rhetoric hits a brick wall of geological reality. There is no domestic supply to ramp up. The Buy Elsewhere rhetoric hits a wall of geopolitical reality. There is no safe alternative to Canada. This leaves American farmers trapped in a cage built by their own government. We are seeing a repetition of the 2018 trade wars, but the stakes are significantly higher. Back then, when soy tariffs cost American farmers nearly $27 billion, the government stepped in with subsidies. Washington wrote checks to cover the damage that Washington caused. But you cannot subsidize your way out of a physical shortage. If the potash stops coming, or if the price becomes mathematically impossible for farmers to pay, the crops simply do not yield. You cannot print fertilizer. The administration is gambling that Canada will fold before American farmers break, but every indicator suggests they have misread the opponent. Canada is not scrambling. They are not panicking. While our farmers are bracing for disaster, Ottawa is calmly looking at the rest of the world. They see Brazil, the world's largest importer of potash, desperate to secure long-term contracts. They see India, they see Southeast Asia, they see a hungry world that does not have a trade war with them. If the United States pushes itself out of the Canadian market, those millions of tons of potash will not pile up in warehouses in Saskatchewan. They will be loaded onto, we are watching a fundamental realignment of global agricultural power, and it is happening in real time while Washington is distracted by the headline politics of the day. The administration's calculation relied on the idea that the United States is the indispensable customer, the buyer that Canada cannot afford to lose. But if you look at the activity in the ports of Vancouver and the boardrooms of São Paulo and Beijing, you see a very different story unfolding. The world is not waiting for the United States to resolve its internal trade disputes. The world is moving on. While American farmers are paralyzed by uncertainty, watching their input costs soar and their margins vanish, our global competitors are seizing the opportunity to lock in the resources we are pushing away. Consider Brazil. As the world's largest importer of potash, Brazil has an insatiable appetite for fertilizer to feed its massive soybean and corn industries, industries that are direct competitors to American farmers. Seeing the instability created by Washington's tariffs, Brazil has moved aggressively to strengthen its trade ties with Canada. They are not just buying on the spot market, they are looking to secure long-term supply. They are signing the kind of multi-year contracts that guarantee stability. And they are not alone. China is doing the exact same thing, expanding its agreements with producers in Saskatchewan. These nations understand what the White House seems to have forgotten. In a resource-constrained world, the country that secures the supply chain wins the market. This is the nightmare scenario for the American agricultural sector. We are not just making it expensive for our farmers to do business, we are actively driving our primary supplier into the arms of our fiercest competitors. We are incentivizing Canada to build the infrastructure and the relationships to service Asia and South America instead of the Midwest. And here is the hard truth about international trade that every economist knows, but every populist ignores. Once supply chains shift, they rarely shift back. If Canada builds its logistics to serve Brazil and China, and if those countries sign 5 or 10-year contracts, that potash is off the table for the United States. We are losing our place in line, perhaps permanently. We have seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. In 2024 alone, more than 70% of China's soybean imports came from Brazil. That used to be American market share. We lost it during the last trade war, and we never fully got it back. Supply chains are like rivers. Once you divert them, it takes an enormous amount of energy to force them back into their old channels. By picking a fight over potash, we are risking the same fate for our entire agricultural input system. We are forcing the global market to reorganize itself around a United States-sized whole, and the longer these tariffs stay in place, the more permanent that reorganization becomes. Facing a wave of outrage from the Farm Belt, the Trump administration has been forced to acknowledge the pain, even if they won't admit the policy is the cause. Their solution is a familiar one: throw money at the problem. In July 2025, the White House announced a new $65 billion agricultural relief package. It is a staggering amount of taxpayer money, with billions earmarked specifically to help farmers manage soaring fertilizer costs. On the surface, this looks like support. It looks like the government has the farmers' backs. But scratch that surface and you find a policy that is frantic, reactive, and ultimately unsustainable. The administration is effectively taxing American consumers to subsidize American farmers to pay for the higher costs caused by the administration's own tariffs. It is a circular economic firing squad. And for the farmers I speak to, it is not a solution. It is a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Farmers do not want to be wards of the state. They do not want their profitability to depend on whether a bureaucrat in Washington signs a relief check that year. They want a functioning market. They want to be able to buy fertilizer at a competitive price and sell their grain for a profit. A subsidy might keep the lights on for one more season, but it does not fix the underlying loss of competitiveness. As one former soybean farmer turned activist told us, we don't want a bailout. We want our customers back and we want our costs down. The contrast between how the two nations are handling this moment could not be starker. While the United States is engaged in a chaotic scramble of tariffs, counter-tariffs, and emergency bailouts, lurching from crisis to crisis, Canada is executing a long-term strategic vision. They are not just sitting back and taking the hits, they are prioritizing resilience. Look at their domestic policy. Ottawa has implemented programs like agri-stability, along with multi-billion-dollar credit supports designed to give their farmers a genuine safety cushion against market volatility. They are insulating their producers from the shockwaves while we expose ours to the storm. But it goes beyond just safety nets. Canada is fundamentally shifting its agricultural model. They are moving away from being just a raw commodity exporter dependent on the American market. They are pivoting toward high-value agriculture, premium pork for Asian markets, specialty pulses for Europe, and Canadian-branded products known for quality. Potash is the anchor of this strategy, the resource that gives them the leverage to build these new relationships. They are using their mineral wealth to buy their way into new markets and diversify their economy. They are building a fortress of trade relationships that the United States cannot easily breach. So, while Washington ties itself in knots with short-term fixes and political posturing, Canada is strengthening its reputation as the adult in the room, a reliable supplier, a stable partner, and a strategic player that keeps its word. In a time of global uncertainty, reliability is a currency more valuable than the dollar. By acting erratically, by using tariffs as a blunt instrument against an ally, the United States is devaluing its own standing. We are telling the world that we are a risky market, that our policy is subject to the whims of the political calendar. Meanwhile, Canada is quietly, methodically proving that it is open for business with anyone who is willing to pay the market price, effectively isolating the United States on its own continent. The tragic irony is that this was entirely avoidable. The United States and Canada have one of the most integrated economic relationships in human history. Our rail lines, our pipelines, our supply chains are woven together. To try and untangle them for the sake of a win on a balance sheet is an act of economic self-sabotage. In the next segment, we will look at the future outlook. We will ask the question that is haunting every rural community: what happens if these tariffs don't go away? What happens to the American farm if this temporary trade war becomes the new normal? And we will look at the political calculation, why the administration refuses to pivot even as the evidence of failure mounts. This is not just about the next harvest, it is about the next generation of American agriculture. Ships and sent to our competitors. We are literally incentivizing our primary supplier to strengthen ties with the very nations we compete against in the global agricultural market. It is a masterclass in unintended consequences. We are forcing Canada to diversify their customer base, effectively reducing their dependence on us, while we remain 100% dependent on them. The administration continues to frame this as a battle for economic patriotism. They talk about fairness, but you have to ask the question, what is fair about a policy that bankrupts the people it claims to protect? What is patriotic about weakening your own food security to score a political point? The farmers I talk to do not want a handout. They do not want another emergency relief package that barely covers the interest on their loans. They want a market that works. They want to be able to buy the inputs they need at a price that makes sense so they can sell their product to a world that wants to buy it. Instead, they are being treated as collateral damage. They are the pawns in a game where the king, the administration, refuses to admit that the board is tilted against him. In the next segment, we are going to look at the fallout. We are going to examine how Brazil and China are already moving to capitalize on this American unforced error. We are going to look at the long-term damage this does to trade relationships that take decades to build, but only moments to destroy. Because once these supply chains shift, once Brazil signs those long-term contracts with Canada, they do not just switch back because Washington decides to change its mind. We are witnessing the potential permanent erosion of American agricultural competitiveness, and we need to understand exactly what that looks like for the future of this country. The story of potash today extends far beyond the realm of agricultural fertilizer. It lays bare the fragility of the United States' economic power in a way that few other issues do. For decades, Washington has operated under the assumption that it could dictate the terms of global trade, that it could command every supply chain simply by virtue of being the world's largest economy. Yet, here we are, finding ourselves dependent on our northern neighbor, a partner we cannot easily pressure and one that holds the keys to our own food security. For Canada, potash has transformed from a simple export into a symbol of strategic strength. It is the resource that safeguards the livelihoods of their farmers while elevating the country's position on the global stage. They have realized that in a world of scarcity, the supplier holds the power, not the buyer. For the United States, this crisis is an expensive wake-up call. No superpower can maintain its status while severing the very arteries that sustain its own economy. We are learning the hard way that you cannot tweet your way out of a geological deficit. In an era where food security has become a key measure of national power, right up there with defense capabilities and energy independence, potash is no longer merely a mineral. It is a stress test. It is a test of how nations navigate their mutual dependencies in a volatile world. We are failing that test because we are treating a symbiotic relationship as a zero-sum game, and the math simply does not support that strategy. The question now facing the White House is uncomfortable but unavoidable. Does Washington have the courage to set aside its pride? Do they have the political will to admit that the tariff strategy on this specific critical mineral was a mistake? The choice is stark. They can lift the tariffs, normalize trade with Canada, and protect the American farmer from financial ruin. Or they can double down, continue to gamble the future of American agriculture on a confrontation whose outcome is already all too clear, and watch as our competitors in Brazil and Russia reap the benefits. Because if even potash, the quiet, invisible mineral that feeds billions, can be pulled into a geopolitical tug of war, then we have to ask, what will become the next casualty? What other essential resource will be weaponized next? And will we be prepared then? Or will we make the same mistake of prioritizing optics over economics? These are the hidden competitions that are reshaping the global economy, and we ignore them at our peril. If you found this report worth reflecting on, please like and subscribe so we can continue to bring you the stories that others overlook. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.